Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop Vanessa M. Brown, and I am your host and moderator for this evening. I am so very happy to be here with you tonight. I'd like to welcome our Facebook Live audience here, our YouTube audience, our X audience, no longer Twitter, X audience, all of those that are watching from your various places and spaces and various social media platforms. I'm going to ask that you all, and I'll say it again, give us a big push. It is because of you that we are still able to be here. And so we want to give you a big thank you for continuing to support Beyond the Gatekeepers. Especially want to thank you for those that supported us on last week. We have had so many people to view that particular episode of Beyond the Gatekeepers as we honor the living Bishop Carlton Pearson and all of the ones that have come on the show to speak with regards to the impact that he has had on their life and in their ministry. And so let me say thank you, all of the viewers of Beyond the Gatekeepers, whether it was on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, from Beyond the Gatekeepers page or Bishop Flunder's page. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. We ask that you can continue to share that, continue to post that out into social media, and all of the other conversations that you believe will do people good and will help them, because that's what this show is about. We want to help people. We want to have these current conversations, these theological conversations through a justice-informed lens, and theological conversations around everyday life as well. And so we thank you for what you have done. And so I want to start giving a shout out to those who are on, and I see you. Thank you for sharing. So tell us where you're from. I see Reginald Nichols. Thank you for being on. Stockton, California. Albert Reed is here from Kyling, Texas, usually every week. Thank you so much, Brother Albert, for being with us. Claudia Vieira Allen, thank you. Richmond, California. Debbie Brown, thank you. Good to see you again, Debbie. From Chicago, Pastor Siegfried Benton, thank you for being here. Temple Hills, Maryland. Again, Denise Fortson from New York City. Thank you, Denise. Esley Edwards from Chicago, thank you. Thank you. Leanne Brenda, thank you. Thank you for both being on. Bishop Sonia Williams, thank you so much. ATL is in the building. And happy 15th church anniversary, and happy anniversary to you and Lady Regina as well. Mary Duke, thank you for joining us from Raleigh, North Carolina. Lawan Washington, thank you for being here. Las Vegas. YouTube, Arvell Alexander, thank you. Elena is here, thank you. How you doing? Darlene Pittman Connell from Queens, thank you for being here. Ozone Park. Patricia Denise Woods, thank you for being here. Quincy James Reinhardt. Big shout out to Quincy James Reinhardt. He is the person that introduced me to our guest on this evening, and he contacted me this morning with another list of people, and I'm excited. Thank you for helping me, Quincy. Love you so much, dear brother. Arnold Townsend from San Francisco, bless you. Joanne Robertson on YouTube. Nashville, Tennessee is in the house. I love it. Gloria Mason, welcome. Glad that you're here tonight. Miko Mo, YouTube, thank you. Consistently from McDonough, Georgia, bless you. Minister Sandy Hudson, thank you. Paris, California, also consistent. Reverend Beverly Scott Hudson, thank you so much. She's at the Baptist Pastors and Ministers Conference in Philadelphia. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, cousin. Shaquita Farley Johnson, Griffin, Georgia. Charla Belcher, thank you. Connecticut. Sharita Hall, thank you. Bobby Jones from Orlando, Florida on YouTube. Elder Sharon Gill, Pennsylvania. Monique Nelda, New Jersey. Elder Boaz Parker, Philadelphia. Good evening to you. Carolyn Gilchrist, Houston, Texas. Cedric Jones, thank you. Charleston, South Carolina. Pastor Pamela K. Williams, Philadelphia. T. Mark, good to see you, brother. Durham, North Carolina is in the house, and people are gathering. I know that you will be sharing to let people know that we have a very, very, very powerful conversation that is going to take place on tonight. Deacon Ryan Harris, thank you. Cincinnati is here. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Let me just say also that Bishop Flunder, unfortunately, will not be able to be here with us. We want to say this because this happened and we didn't get a chance to say it. Many of you may know Bishop Tanya Rawls, Bishop Tanya Rawls out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Her wife passed away a week before last. The funeral was on Saturday past. Bishop Flunder did the eulogy for Gwendolyn Rawls and the family, and her and Mother Miller flew to Charlotte to be with them, and then they had to fly out the next day to be in Palm Springs. And so we want to just continue to lift Bishop Flunder and Mother Miller up as they continue to travel and do God's work, but also as they continue to listen to their bodies to tell them when they need to settle. And so you all keep them in prayer as well. I see more people joining the YouTube room, Unfolding with Peggy P3. Thank you for joining us tonight. Pastor Terry Chan from Oakland, California, City of Refuge. Thank you for being with us, Pastor Terry. We appreciate your presence. Tonight, it gives me a great opportunity to bring for you tonight a woman of God who, just to speak to her, she's just so kind. So kind. And I am so excited about her new book. And she is Reverend Stephanie Buckhanon Crowder, PhD. She is professor of New Testament and Culture at Chicago Theological Seminary. And she has a new book, and it is called Are You For Real? Imposter Syndrome, the Bible and Society. Dr. Crowder, Dr. Buckhanon Crowder, Dr. Stephanie. Hi.
Hello, Bishop Brown. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great, and welcome back with those fly glasses you have on. What are we doing here? You look great.
Thank you so much. It's this bifocal life, if you will. So
I know about that. I do. I do. I know about it. So we have a new book on the table. I'm so excited to see that and to know it. And I was like, oh, okay, let me contact her right now. Hopefully, she's going to tell me yes. I want to get her on before the holidays. I think it's a great conversation to have. And so thank you for your yes.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. It's one thing to be invited one time, but when you get a return visit, I think, oh, Lord, something must have happened. So I'm very grateful to be back on Beyond the Gatekeepers, indeed.
Certainly your first book was a huge impact on our listening audience. And of course, you all can go back and watch it at any time on YouTube and Facebook. Powerful conversation around that book. And I think that people were able to really, really, really live into a lot of the things that you said, but also having had those experiences as well. Right. And so we want to say thank you automatically for your yes on tonight. Yeah. And so I want to just, I start off all the time pretty much with the same question. People think that I'm gonna have trick questions. I have no trick questions. They are because you wrote this book and you know exactly what you said. And so I want to ask you first, what brought on this particular book and the title of it as well?
Sure. So are you for real? It's kind of double meaning, double entendre. People, ask you like, are you for real? But then it's also like, are you for real? Right. So depending on where you put the inflection, it came about out of really two streams, Bishop. Yeah. And let me give honor to, of course, Bishop Pearson and also to Bishop Flunder as well. And again, acknowledging you, Bishop Brown, for this opportunity. Two streams are really sort of the source of this book, if you will. One has to do with there were any number of persons in the academy who were pretending that they were members of a racial ethnic group, but they were not a member of that racial ethnic group. So this whole posing, if you will, they were living imposter lives. And so they got found out. There's been another case recently of another professor who was pretending to be a member. So that was a part of it a couple of years ago, all these different stories that kept happening back to back to back. And then the pivot to the pandemic, to everything shutting down March 2020. Yeah. It was the idea that, and not just the idea, but the action that what was our private homes became public space. And so we were having to, reboot because, when you're at home, you get to be at home.
Right.
But with Zoom and all this other video conferencing, people were invading our homes.
Yes.
So we had to sort of put up, fronts, and, because we didn't need people to see everything that was going on. But yet it wasn't our fault that there was a pandemic. So this whole sense of imposters in the academy, this kind of, facade and uneasiness, the second guessing that we were being forced to relish with at home.
Yeah.
And so what are the ways then? I said, well, what is this? There's passing, there's imposterism, there's something that's happening. And so I just did some digging and a deep dive and some research and came across this idea of imposter syndrome or imposter phenomena. And I was like, it was new to me. Of course, I knew about passing and imposters, but this was a different way of thinking about that uneasiness, that facade, if you will. So the idea for me was, well, wait a minute, what is it when we're in spaces and we've achieved, we've accomplished, but there's this sense of self-doubt.
Yeah.
We got the degrees, we got the house, we got the car, the dog, the cat, the bird, we have everything, the expense account, but yet we're waiting, Bishop, for just, if I can say, the ish to hit the fan, if
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah.
Where it's that feeling, that uneasiness, that dis-ease, where we're waiting for someone to tap us on the shoulder to say, get up, you don't belong. So all of that sort of, I think to me, was sort of coming to a head around the pandemic, around here, folks in the academy who are pretending to be someone they were not, on Zoom, folk invading our homes, our territories. At the same time, we were also dealing with still first, the first Black woman in this position, or the first LGBTQIA person in this position. And so here it was, we're still dealing with these first, but not all these spaces where we as first dwell are welcoming spaces.
That's right.
And so that's where all of this kind of research and interest in imposter syndrome came from. There was also this issue that as I was researching, I said, well, wait a minute, where's faith? Where's belief? Where's theology? Now, people were writing, but they weren't putting faith, belief, theology, God, Jesus, Buddha, on the table.
Sure.
So me being who I am, I said, well, we got to talk about Bible theology somewhere. So that's, the idea was, how do I fill a space?
Yeah.
How do I add to the conversation? How do I say, well, we're not talking about imposter syndrome and theology and the Bible. So that's really the etiology of the book.
Awesome. And so I was able to, go through chapters and read things. And so I have particular questions around chapters and just around the even the titles of the chapters. And before I get into it, I see that Reverend Knock has come in, Reverend Patrick Alfred. Hello to you all. Earl Lockett Larson. Thank you all for joining us. And we're asking Dinah Chapman, thank you for being here, Dublin, California. We're asking that people share this conversation. So chapter 1, what is?
Yes.
I said, when I looked at that, I said, okay, she's going somewhere with this chapter, and we don't want to give so much away, but tell us a little bit about the chapter.
So the idea, I wanted to play on the the imposter syndrome. So you'll see me sort of riffing off of that in many regards throughout the book. So yeah, what it is, what is imposter syndrome? So just kind of giving let me offer this caveat. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. Yes. And so right off the bat, I say, I am sorry if I have flubbed some things. And if, some psychologists are like, take away her card, because I'm not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. But I think there are ways in which through my own framework, we can still engage these various topics. So, what it is, what is imposter syndrome, and just giving kind of general, broad, cursory definitions of.
And by that, I do want you to get into it based upon your lens, from the way that you see it. How do you define imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is that feeling of facade and second guessing. It is that constant sort of cloud that hangs over one's head that says, no matter what we've achieved, no matter what we've accomplished, no matter what we've done, we feel that we still haven't obtained enough, that we feel that we don't deserve what we've achieved, that we don't deserve what we've obtained. It is that facade, that sense of phoniness, that perhaps we don't know enough, that we don't deserve to be in these rooms, in these spaces. It is that fake, funky feeling, if you will.
Fake funky feeling. Somebody write that down. Fake funky feeling. I like it.
It is that fake funky feeling that here it is, alliteration. We're about to be found out to be a fraud.
Wow.
That fake funky feeling that we are about to be found out to be a fraud.
And do you think that lends itself to the fact that people feel that they are not enough?
Absolutely. It's internal.
Yes.
So some of it is, let me say, some of it is internal. Mm-hmm. But what I also go to say, you'll notice in the book, mm-hmm. at the end of each chapter, I have IS, individual study.
Correct.
IS, institutional study.
Mm-hmm.
Because I also believe that there are systemic structures, that there are systems in place that also feed into, that also trigger, that I think also cause and give rise to, Bishop, this imposter syndrome.
Make you feel like you're not enough.
That you are not enough. That, you're sitting at a table, sitting in a room, and it's not welcoming. Yeah. And you know that you were hired to do this job, hired to create change. But yet and still, when you come and sit down, there's a sense of, who told you to sit there? And why are you sitting there?
Absolutely.
So yes.
Absolutely. Okay. And I had a thought. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say the institution, but I've been invited to sit at a particular table, and I could feel, I feel like I am enough, mm-hmm. but I can feel like they feel like I'm not enough.
Sure.
With my red hair and my queer self, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. But I'm still, asking all the questions that needed to be asked and still participating in the conversation. But I feel there is something, and you can feel it, like, when it's there. Right. When there is something in the room, when there's something that undergirds an institution, that although they've invited you to the table, mm-hmm. there is something there that says, although we put a plate before you, don't eat it.
Right. And that's a part of the whole imposter syndrome, or some people call it imposter phenomenon. Mm-hmm. I like the idea of the syndrome because the syndrome says that, it's an ongoing kind of thing. Now, mm-hmm. yes, there are ways in which we have to be careful in thinking of syndromes, because we usually equate syndromes with persons who identify as women and as female. So right. We have to be careful of that. But yet research shows that men deal with imposter syndrome just as well as, we who identify as women also deal with imposter syndrome. And also a part of the system then begins to say, how do we follow institutional cords? How do we follow organizational cable? All this talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yet there's this kind of ruffling that happens when people who have not occupied certain chairs begin to occupy certain chairs. Mm-hmm. And then we begin to experience this kind of, did I not graduate from this institution? Do I not have these credentials? Do I not have this experience? We begin to question ourselves. Absolutely. Whereas previously, we probably did not question ourselves.
That's
but
right.
The research around imposter syndrome, Bishop, says that oftentimes for those who are the first, whether it's the first person in your family to go to college or the first person in your family to graduate from college, whether you are the first person, yes, who looks like us, to hold a position in a church, in a school, in a college, a university, in an organization, whether you are the first in your family to graduate with a particular degree. And so what are the ways in which this firstness contributes to the imposter syndrome? And that becomes a reflection not just of the individual who is sitting in that chair, who's inhabiting that space and rightfully inhabiting that space, but that becomes a question for the institution. So that when institutions hire who they know is going to be the first, then what are the ways that institutions have or have not done their own homework? They have not prepared the space. They have not, prepared the ground for this person. They have not prepared themselves to be hospitable and welcoming.
Absolutely.
And so you have the institutional dynamics and then the dynamics of being first. They meet up. And so then you have this kind of institutional imposterism that's going on that meets with our own individual imposter syndrome as well.
One of the people that are on, they made a great statement, said the struggle is real. It happens in the pulpit too. Mm-hmm. I know I have been called, but sometimes folks try to treat me like I owe them proof.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that I mentioned that whether it's a church, temple, mosque, synagogue, I don't think there's any institution, any organization that's off the table in this regard, because we're talking about people and we're talking about leadership qualities. We're talking about systems. And we know that our churches, our religious bodies, our religious institutions are indeed reeking of systems, if you will. And so what are the ways, being the first, who's the pastor? And there are also ways in which these institutions, I say, lean into what I call predecessor proclivities, right? Predecessor proclivities.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. The previous pastor did it this way, or the previous manager did it that way, or wait a minute, the previous director didn't do that. Or so all of these ways in which institutions, yes, our beloved religious institutions, lean into predecessor proclivities by questioning, whether now that we are sitting in this seat, questioning if we even have the right to make changes. Not just whether if we're capable of, but do we have the right to make changes, to do something differently because the person before us did it a certain way. And that's a part of that feeding into the kind of imposter syndrome or imposterism as well. It is a posturing that happens in the institutions that in many ways feeds into the imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. I want to just say to everybody, you're watching Beyond the Gatekeepers. Thank you so much for sharing the Facebook Lives and the YouTubes and all of those things. We want to let you all know that we are talking to Dr. Stephanie Crowder, and she has a new book. The book is Are You For Real? Imposter Syndrome, the Bible and Society. And so we're going to be giving away a copy of this book, free book giveaway. You just type the hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers, all one word, just the way you see it on the screen with an S at the end so that your name could be included. We want to make sure that you are a part of that. But we also want you to know that you can purchase the book. That's very important. And if you go to Amazon, you can get it. You can also get it through Kindle as well. Kindle has it. I downloaded it from Kindle. You all should do the same if that works for you. But if not, purchase the book. This is a good book. It's a great discussion. You'll see Pastor Sue putting all of the links into the chat area. And so we want you to know that these are the things that you need to do. But we want you to also buy the book, but we want you to try to win the book tonight as well. Dr. Crowder, is and women.
Yeah. So
which we touched base a little bit on, but I need you to go all the way there with that.
Absolutely. So, I think the divine is just so timely. So I was looking just yesterday on IG, and the only African-American woman who is CEO of a Fortune 500 company, I don't know if I can give names or not, but there were two, now there's one. So the Sunday Ducket, just yesterday, posted and said, "You belong in any room. Take your seat."
I saw it. Yes.
She said, we've all experienced mental gymnastics, those times when the voice of what? Self-doubt is trying to have the last word. So
Yes.
here she is, right? TIA, CREF, and she's the only African American woman who's head of a Fortune 500 company. But she often makes these IG posts around what we call imposter syndrome. And
Yes.
so the study started about 1978, and it was really a study that Doctors Clance and Imes did with white women who were about in their 20s and 30s, and were in graduate school. Some of them were doctors, but they were experiencing the sense of I don't belong, or the sense of
Yeah.
second guessing. Now, of course, there were challenges with the study. It lacked cultural competency. It didn't
Correct.
really pay attention to class and sexuality and gender. But we can take things and recontextualize it and dip it and do what we need to do with it to make it live for us in our own settings.
Right.
But the idea was that here were these sort of high class, supposedly mated in the shade women who were feeling that like they were frauds, who were feeling that they'd accomplished, but that wasn't enough, who were waiting for the bottom to fall out. And so much of the work around imposter syndrome has been with, heterosexual cisgender women. But I found out in my search, there is a whole Palgrave handbook on imposter syndrome. We had folk who identified as queer, who identified as lesbian, saying, well, wait a minute, we experience this too.
Absolutely.
Folk who were saying in churches, in religious institutions, they're experiencing this. I particularly noted in this chapter about women, just ways in which women are always put in these positions as we're supposed to nurture, right? We're supposed to woo, woo, woo. But what happens when we are in spaces where we don't want to woo, woo, woo and nurture? Why is it that we have to always, offer our bodies up? Why can't we use our brains as well and our mental and intellectual capacities? So that's
Sure.
also a part of what's happening in that chapter about women and imposter syndrome. And part of also what I address is that it's not just women. And again, that being careful with the language of syndrome or phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Right.
they're interchangeable, if you will, but just
Mm-hmm.
being aware that men experience this kind of questioning and second guessing. The article noticed particularly folk who are first time, what we call first gen ed college students,
Mm-hmm.
experience it. You perhaps were valedictorian, and now you get to college and it's a B here and a B there. That can dishevel people a bit. And so the IS and Women talks about ways in which women college students were experiencing this dis-ease, if you will, because they were the valedictorians where they were. Talking about women CEOs, right? And so again, these kind of systemic and these structural places, because here's the challenge. Most of society still pivots, leans on, still has as its model cisgender, heterosexual white men.
Absolutely.
And so anything that is different from that, we still deem some type of anomaly in society.
Absolutely. We can look at the government right now and see, just by the fact that who the Speaker of the House is.
Mm-hmm.
51-year-old attorney who is trying to turn back the times into the handmaiden's days, the handmaiden tales. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like, you have to hear his ideology around women
Mm-hmm.
and what he thinks women are created for, and that every single woman should have produced or born a child, and that child should be working,
Mm-hmm.
and that we are here, women, to bear children to work. So yes, that I mean, it's something that's still trying to be played out, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then it's under the guise of religion.
That's right.
This
That's
is
right.
what God wants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely. So the idea is say not just to put it all on women, but how do we also think about systems and structures? How do we also think about what goes on in these organizations, in our institutions? I talk about microaggressions, the little NIMBY pity things, petty things that happen, in our workplaces, or
Yes.
even in our religious institutions, that slick remark that church member said, and then it kind of hee once they said it, that's a microaggression.
Yes, it is.
Email bullying that happens, blind copy craziness that goes on. You're not being informed about some meeting. This whole question of, well, are you sure? Are you certain? Those are microaggressions
Yes.
that impact our bodies, that
Yeah.
impact our intellectual capacity, that impact our ability to really relish and thrive in our workplaces, in our congregations, in organizations and institutions. And I say in the book, I said, we have to call these microaggressions out, because these
Yes.
microaggressions really become macro agitations, if you
Absolutely.
will.
Yes.
And if we are not careful, these microaggressions become macro agitation. And before we know it, we're trying to cope with all of this. And then we're on macro medication.
Yes.
So we have to call this, these, well, are you sure? Well, that's not how we used to do it. And well, normally we sing the hymn after we read the script, so things like that, as feeding into and poking and prodding. Because again, most of us are pretty confident and pretty sure and secure in who we are. But in new context, we're trying to get our sea legs about us.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so then you're facing with email stuff and the little slight, slick remarks that people make. And all of that feeds into this kind of imposterism within us. And for many of us, it's something that we never experienced. But again, context where we're first still, or we're the only still, or we're new. Even if we're new at a place where we've been working, there's still these feelings of dis-ease and discomfort that arise within us. And again, it's not just us. And I want to repeat and continue to reiterate that our institutions have to be held accountable for this as well. Society, hence the title, society has to be held accountable for this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so for you all to say, what is Bishop Brown doing? The book is so rich. That's why I'm just going to encourage you to get it. But I feel like I need to go chapter by chapter, and I probably won't get to all of it. But that is why I encourage you to get the book. So the next, I mean, like boom, 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 you smack us, bam, 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 like you took some boxing lessons or something. And the next chapter right after that is and race.
Right. So, there's a target on our backs, who we are as, Black, African-American folk, whatever, however we want to identify. And so what are the ways then, again, because we're still in context where we're the first at this institution, or we're the first in this position. I mean, I just said, the Sonda Duckett, 500 Fortune 500 companies, 500, but she's the only African-American. And so ways in which, yes, this kind of public facing, but at the same time, the sense of, well, do you belong? And so how do we think about our own sense of identity? How do we begin to think about ways in which society has even said to us that our bodies are valueless, right? We can call the roll, right, of all of the hashtag, say her name. We can call the roll of hashtag Black Lives Matter. What is society then saying to us if we're talking about all of these killings? Many of the people who go and there isn't any kind of, or if there is a conviction, it's a hollow conviction and an empty verdict. I mean, we just heard about what the young man, what was that, Arizona, choking him. They found out, it's proof he was choked. They even put poison in his body. Nothing happens. So what are the ways in which society says to us as African Americans that our bodies don't matter? And yet there's this expectation that we're supposed to show up, do our jobs, and perform with perfection and excellence, and to be on our post, and to do things well, and here it is, to be polite and to be nice, even in the midst of these societal microaggressions that tell us we are valueless, we are worthless, that our bodies don't count for much of anything. And so that's a part of that too. So that not only in our organizations are we battling this sense of fake and phoniness and this looking over our shoulder, but even in society at large. So there are sort of macrocosmic cosmic impacts as well as macrocosmic impacts that talk to us and that give us messaging about who we are and who we are not. Even messages that perhaps we are not even human beings. So again, what are the ways in which imposter syndrome feeds into that, ways in which society has structured it so that we are deemed less than and deemed not worth much? And how does that feed into this sense of, yes, fake phoniness, and I just know the bottom is going to drop out any moment at any time? And so that's a part of what I was trying to address. That, well, here's an overview. There's women, there's race. I didn't even get to class, Bishop, right? Because part of what the IMS and Clance study they don't address what are the ways in which, if you grew up, in Cabrini Green, more in the hood or in the project.
Chicago, exactly.
Chicago, all of that. How does that impact how
it does
we grow up or not in particular spaces, right?
Right.
People talking about fundraising. What do you know about fundraising and philanthropy? Look
exactly.
at your background. So so I didn't even get to class, but I said, let me start with race and with women, and then we can go from there.
And do you think, and this is just my question before we get into the Bible piece of it, do you think that what we experience institutionally, what we experience in society, is also a reason why sometimes we do these things to each other in our own communities?
How do we feel about ourselves? How do we love ourselves or not love ourselves? How do we care for ourselves? Because the love that we do have for ourselves, it gets reflected in our relationships. The love that we don't have for ourselves, that gets reflected in our relationships too. At the same time, there are still structures that, don't make it easy for us to get the things that we need to get so that we can take care of ourselves and love ourselves. Are we in positions, are we at jobs that don't make having vacation days easy, that make it difficult to take sick days, that make it difficult to provide for our children and our family? And so what are the ways in which we take out that frustration, that aggravation, ways in which we take out that lack of economic stability? I'm not justifying it, but I think there are ways in which our systems are just as culpable for the ways in which we live, move, and perhaps don't have our being in this world.
And do you think that you can say that a lot of this institutional racism, a lot of this, the things around women, all of this is, the foundation is white supremacy?
I think
Would that be fair to say?
I don't know why I stuttered, but there's something that says, why it is that this particular group has to be less than, that they have to be ostracized. I was rewatching James Baldwin's "I Am Not Your Negro," and with that, that closing comment, he says, white folk need to ask, why is it that you need an NIGGER? He says, I'm not one, but you need to figure out why you need one.
Come on.
And what are you telling yourself that you need to create this thing called a nigger?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a question that needs to be asked. But yet at the same time, I think we also have to take what Baldwin says to heart and say, but I am not. This is who I am.
This is who I am.
This is my lineage. This is my ancestry. And what are the ways then, if we're talking about imposter syndrome, that we show up, that our ancestors walk into those rooms with us.
Yes.
That, the lineage, if you will, of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner and Malcolm and Martin and Fannie Lou and Ella, they walk in those spaces with us, that John Lewis is sitting on our shoulders saying,
Yes.
raise some hell up in here, up in here. So, how do we begin then to reclaim that, those spaces that based on our lineage, based on our heritage? And yes, part of dealing with the microaggressions is calling it out and saying that, you know what, this is white supremacy, this is racism. And even in our most liberal of liberal institutions, there are still ways in which there's blind sides, if you will, or there's a kind of blindness, if you will, to some of the racism and sexism and classism and heteronormativity that takes place.
It's interesting that this whole thing comes up at this time. Dr. Stephen Ray put up a post a couple of weeks ago, and it's around the fact that he was invited to Yale he was up there for something, but he was invited to, I guess it's like a country club, so to speak, whatever it is. And him being there, it was, although they invited him, it was his previous experiences there as a Black man that said that he didn't belong there by the way that they treated him. And now that he is this person, right, and has all of these degrees and all of these different things, they want him to still be a part of this club, but he still feels that whole energy around him being a part of something so white, right? It's this institution that has come, and how he is treated differently now, and wondering if that's a place where he still should be. Although now that he's received, is that someplace he wants to be? And I think that these questions come up oftentimes for many of us, right? That they will invite us because we have the credentials, right?
We've arrived.
Is there? We've arrived, right? But like, are we really feeling at home in these spaces?
And the other part of it is, Bishop, was the invitation for us, or was it for the institution?
You see what I mean?
So, I mean, that's a part of it as well. So, all this conversation about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
Is it for us, or really is it for the institution? Are we just kind of, let's just check some things off?
Absolutely.
And so we have to be mindful of that as to, what is the why of our sitting in these seats?
That's right. What is the why of us sitting in these seats, and what is the why of us even entering into these institutions? Because remember, I just told you about a school, I won't name them, who is now giving out scholarships to African-American students, as a part of their reparations. Praise God, though, in a good praise God, as a part of their reparations to African-American people. So it's so many questions. So many questions that you have to ask yourself, and you have to ask the institution, and you have to, whatever it is, whether the institution is a academic institution or whether it's a church, you have to ask yourself, am I here? Why am I here? Am I here just to check a box? Because there's so many boxes. Right. I fit a lot of boxes. I'm African American or Black, whatever you want to say. I am queer or same gender loving. You know what I mean? I'm a woman. Let's go down the list of the boxes that we can check. And sometimes people are trying to fill a quota.
That's right. And you hit on such a significant point as it relates to imposter syndrome, that we need to vocalize, verbalize. We need to say out loud. We need to vocalize, verbalize, and say out loud. Well, why am I here? I mean, even during interview processes, even before we sign the contract, that I think at some points we have nothing to lose. That's because if we don't say it, if we don't speak it, if we don't put it into the atmosphere, then we'll end up swallowing it, holding it in. And before we know it, again, here comes the macro medication.
That's right.
Part of the questioning is that we have to hold institutions accountable for calling us, emailing us, texting us, sending search firms after us in the first place.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is that, however it is that we get to the table, to the interview, that we
Right.
have to hold them accountable for that. Because it's not just that, yes, we're trying to pay our bills and we're trying to, climb the ladder, but we're at the end of the day trying to retire clothed and in our right minds.
Come on now.
Right?
Yes.
We are trying to, leave the institutions, retire, live on a pension, and be able to know where we are, who we are, without, having someone come to wipe us, because we haven't held institutions and organizations and congregations accountable. And so part of my whole point with imposter syndrome in the Bible and theology is not just asking ourselves internal and personal questions, but we have to ask these questions of these institutions as well.
I like that. Dr. Crowder, I want to move to the Bible.
Sure.
You have several instances, several scriptures and texts that can be used. And so I want to go to the widow of Zarephath. And you say here, and for those that, you have to get the book. I want you to get it. Okay. You go to 1 Kings 17 is a self-sabotage. Let's talk about that, because this I need y'all to hear it and start sharing it to the people that are self-sabotagers, because we got some friends amongst us. We have people in our lives. We have family members that are self-sabotagers.
So this was a tough one. And from my first book, When Mama Speaks, the Bible and Woman is Maternal Thought. So anytime there's a mother somewhere, I'm going. So
that's good.
And this whole piece for me, the way in which this widow talks about what her plans for the day are.
Yes.
Right? What are her plans for the day, Bishop? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's just me and my son, and we are about to die.
That's what she said.
Those are her plans for the day. Right? And so not giving her son any opportunity to live to see tomorrow, not giving herself the opportunity to see tomorrow. As far as this widow is concerned, that's just it. That's the end. And this concept of self-sabotage came to me. I was reading someone's thesis, if you will. And the first line says, self-sabotage is used by people who see themselves as imposters.
Yes.
And so I began to wonder, what was it then about this widow of Zarephath, her community, her country, where she was, that made her feel displaced, out of place, marginalized. And so you'll know, where is she? She's what, at the town gate?
Yeah,
that's a pretty prominent place, right? But yet, on her mind, she's not, interested in asking for alms, not interested in, trying to get food or water or life's necessities from anybody else. At this prominent place, her mind, it's like she's been so weathered, if you will, that all that she can really think about, all that resonates with her, is death. And this is the end.
Yeah.
So what are the ways then that this story, what she says, this speaking of death, not just over herself, but over her son, not only becomes self-sabotage, but it also becomes familial sabotage as well. Not giving this child an opportunity to live and to thrive. No, there's no rain, of course. There's a drought, there's water. And so, yes, I get it, that what she sees is nothing but drought and death. Things look dismal, things look bad, but yet at the same time, she's already given up. And
Yeah.
so the way in which I think context shapes ideas around imposter syndrome. She sees drought, no rain. Yes, there are people, we don't have much. We're just going to call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah. She's sunk down into her present circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
she's not moving in faith at all.
No, no.
Right? Uh, um I think I heard a preacher say something about she was living through see nothing days.
Absolutely. 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 And so again, you're at the town gate.
Yeah.
Surely there are people coming, in and there. Elijah comes. Oh my gosh, right? Here's a prophet who comes and
Yes.
it's trying to nudge, but it's almost as if he's, comes offensively. What do you want?
Right.
Don't you see that I'm not trying to pay attention to you? What do you mean fix you something, prepare something for you? What do you mean give you some water, right? But not only water, but bread? What? That's another level of hospitality.
Sure.
You're wanting me to prepare bread for you, but notice the way in which Elijah persists.
Yes.
And yet the woman is like, but that's not what's on my agenda for today. So, what are the ways in which context where there is drought, and drought
Yes.
could be where we don't have professional support? Drought could be where we don't have a social network. The lack of rain could be that, we don't have people in our corners who are telling us, you're doing a good job, you can do it, I'm here for you. Drought may be the lack of professional development opportunities. So there are a
Correct.
number of different ways through the framework of imposter syndrome and through this biblical story that I talk about. Well, then what does drought look like? And what are the ways then that we begin to speak ill, not just of ourselves, and the way that we speak ill of ourselves not only hurts us, could mean our demise, but it can also mean the demise of other folk.
Yes.
That mean, hateful, boss, that person that's always kind of snippy, and we're trying to figure out what's going on with that person. So how does that sort of language impact churches and organizations and our institutions? What's the drought, if you will? What is the kind of human drought that we may see that impacts and that calls us, and that in many ways kind of seals our own professional coffins? So that's what I was trying to do with the story of the widow of Zarephath, and yes, imposter syndrome as self-sabotage.
I'm going to ask one more question around Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about chapter 7.
Okay.
Elijah.
Yeah.
In as it relates to self-deflection.
Sure. So, the idea was, Elijah and just Jezebel, they're just going at it, right? So, Jezebel is like, what happened to those prophets is going to happen to you.
Right.
And she's just, but she doesn't even do anything. And
She's
Elijah just talking.
She's selling wolf tickets.
Selling wolf tickets, Bishop.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so imposter syndrome, what? How an individual perceives their own abilities relative to those around them.
Mm-hmm.
So here was Elijah, how he was perceiving himself relative, yes, to Jezebel's femme fatale wolf tickets. Absolutely. And so he engages in smallness, and what does he do? Hides behind a broom tree. A broom tree? It's a little bitty bush. He goes into hiding. And then, he's like, well, and then it almost like the widow of Zarephath has this death sentence. Mm-hmm. And what does he say? God, just kill me now.
Yeah.
Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Just take me now. And again, twice. saying, God, I've been doing this, and have you forsaken your covenant? You've killed your prophet, but I'm alone. I've seen your great works, but it's just me, and Jezebel is coming after me. Now, mind you, all she has done is just talked. And here it is that Elijah is already in caves, bushes, hiding, afraid. Microaggressions, slick comments, right? Those little shady remarks that people say. Are you sure? Do you really? I mean, you're the boss. You're the pastor. You're the bishop. But are you sure you want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
So the ways in which, that imposter syndrome sort of helping us to begin to think about how do we deflect from ourselves. And here it is. Elijah had just had this wonderful experience.
That's correct.
So how do you come from this great experience where you've seen God's actions and God's might and God's power to what the next couple of chapters you're running, what they say, scared? But if we are in context and where we are questioning, if you will, Bishop, our own sense of who-ness, our own thoughts and our own actions, if we haven't really named those microaggressions, those slick, remarks for what they are, if we haven't followed the institutional cord, then we will engage in this kind of, well, maybe I just need to die. So how do we come from these mountaintop experiences to this valley and abyss dwelling?
And Elijah also, his self-talk.
Yeah.
Right? He's talking himself down. He's just had a mountaintop experience. So not only did he allow Jezebel to talk him down, he allowed his own self to talk him down from that mountaintop experience.
Absolutely.
Based upon things she had to say, but he witnessed the power of God. Right. He experienced the power of God, but he still allowed himself to talk his own self down.
His own self down. And
which is also self-sabotage too.
Also self-sabotage too. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so the idea is, how do we then begin to make what I call big moves when dealing with pettiness and smallness, right? And so, Elijah references his ancestors, and I don't think that we can just skirt over that, because he's trying to find a way out. He's trying.
Yes.
He says, I alone I'm left. I'm progeny. Yes, I have this great ancestry, if you will. So he's trying, right? He's trying to make a Sankofa move, if you will, to deal with Jezebel's threats. And so I think there are ways that we can learn that, when we're in these positions, that, we have to acknowledge that it's not always pretty for us all the time. That we have to acknowledge that we have, I'm having a moment, that we do indeed have moments.
Yeah.
But how do we, like Elijah, even in the midst of dealing with Jezebel's femme fatale and wolf tickets, still remember who our ancestors are, our lineage, to still recall the path and the labor and the love, of those who have gone before us to get us to where we are now. And also, again, how do we call out, the microaggressions, that make us run, and questions that make us go and hide under a bush, or find ourselves in caves, which are unproductive places.
Listen, it happens. You're right.
Yeah.
And it happens to the best of us, for sure.
Yeah.
I want to invite our audience again to, first of all, make sure that you purchase this book. I want to make sure that you go to Amazon or to the places that you can to purchase the book through Kindle, or, there's going to be a free book giveaway tonight. Type the hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. I also want to invite people to ask questions as it relates to the book. And I'll take 2 or 3 questions, 2 questions probably, because we're drawing close to the hour, but I'll take 2 questions from you. But while people are thinking of what they want to say to you, Dr. Crowder, first of all, I want to make sure you all put the word question so we'll can distinguish that it is one, right? But before we do that, I need to deal with the last chapter.
Okay.
I need to deal with the conclusion. They will always question the real you. They will always question the real you. I need you to tell us more about that.
The idea for me is, when I did this, I said, because I'm not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, and even in all the research, because we are constantly moving and because we're constantly dealing with people and we are evolving, we're all trying to better ourselves. We're all trying to, yes, get into those next spaces that you'll always find. The shade will meet you in the boardroom. The microaggressions that could be your welcome email. And so there will always be, because we're still in a society where we're dealing with first. We're dealing with people we've not seen sitting in seats. We're dealing with people who are, writing that we've, have not had the opportunity to do so. We're dealing with folk who are out in public and who are out in front. And we're not accustomed to that because they don't fit, this certain profile as it relates to gender and sex and race and class. So I think in that regard, there will always be questions. Because if we're in a society where we can still say that we are, 3% of this or 2% of this, is composed of LGBTQ persons, or 5% of this is, women of color, and 10% of this, where we can still quantify, I think that's why there will always be questions. Because we've made strides, Lord knows we have. And we've come, over a way that with tears, yes, has been water, but there's still much more to go. And because we're still applauding the first.
Yes.
And because so many of us are in spaces where we're the only. I think, perhaps Gen Zers may have a different kind of understanding to that. But and for many of us, it is, we're the first, we're the only. So that's why I say that there will always be questions. I think the key is for us to call the question for what it is, and for us to begin to ask the questions, and not always be on the one who has to answer them, but to flip it. So yes, the spaces that claim that they are welcoming and hospitable and reconciling and inclusive and engaging, that we have to hold those spaces to the fire, so that so much of their own institutional work is done perhaps before we even walk in the door.
Right.
And so the questions for me is, it is not a kind of pejorative, but it is a space, it's a creative space for organizations, for institutions, for society. But the questions are also creative space for who we are as individuals.
Yeah.
Because we should also be constantly evolving and moving and growing and wrestling with, perhaps certain spaces aren't for us. Perhaps, there's some folk who, I'm in the academy. There's some folk who like, well, I want to teach at HBCU because there's something about HBCUs, or I want to teach, in the Northeast. So, there's, some folk who are very clear contextually, where they believe their gifts could thrive, if you will. And even in those spaces, I think it is still a kind of duality that has to happen, that not only are we questioning ourselves, but that we're also questioning and holding organizations and churches and institutions accountable and responsible also.
I think also, even in that questioning, and even in us asking our own selves the question, like, if we don't belong in those spaces, or if those spaces can't hold us, then we have to also be able to say, it's okay for me to go. It's okay that I can't be here.
It is the gift of goodbye.
It is the gift of goodbye. Absolutely. I don't have to be here. I don't have to stay, and I can go and find someplace else to be.
That's right. That's right. Because again, what is it? We want to live and be clothed and in our right minds once we leave. We're not trying to have a premature death. We believe in God's will. Who knows what the divine. But if we can control it in any way, I want to live a little while longer outside of this institution. Absolutely.
That's right. That's right. And I'm not going to stay here and let y'all kill me.
That's right. That's
And
right.
then act like I liked it, because that's not how that's going to
Right.
go.
And like my silence was consent.
That's
Mhm.
right.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
Dr. Crowder, we have one question that is
Sure.
here, so I'm going to ask it. It says, is there a desperate need for people of color to aggressively engage in religious emancipation to free ourselves from biblical oppression and white
Mm.
Christianity, white
Mm.
supremacy from within the traditional Black church?
Wow. So that's very loaded. So
Lock and loaded.
lock and loaded. So let you know when I write, I'm always saying, what are the ways in which my take on biblical texts can do no harm? And that's the negative way of writing, what we're trying not to do. But at the same time, I'm writing to say, well, what are the ways in which aspects of the biblical text can be liberative?
Mm-hmm.
And so here was an opportunity in thinking of imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon, imposterism, and thinking about, well, wait a minute. Samuel says to Saul, you are small in your own eye.
That's what he said.
That just hit me. So, how can I use this conversation around imposter syndrome and talk about, what I think, could be going on with Saul? Now, I'm not saying that, the biblical text had imposter syndrome in mind at all. But I think there are ways in which, as a current day reader of the biblical text, I can put it in conversation with some other disciplines, and that can be liberative for me, and I hope liberative for other people.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that even in that same passage in 1 Samuel 15, God looks really bad, because God says, kill up the Amalekites, the dogs, the cows, the cat, the sheep,
Everything.
everything.
It's a genocide.
Yes, this is the divine saying this in, our holy writ. So I think part of that emancipation is acknowledging those difficult passages. And
Yes.
there are some times, where the question just needs to be the question that
Mm-hmm.
I don't have an answer.
Right.
you know, Sometimes answers can be low hanging fruit. Sometimes the question needs to carry the day.
Yeah, I like it.
And so that's a part of that liberation and emancipation as
Mhm.
well, as it relates
Some,
to my own engagement with the biblical text.
sure, I like that. Sometimes the question just needs to carry the day.
Mhm.
I think it was Bishop Flunder that did a series. Somebody did it, but she was a part of it, called "Living the Questions,"
Mhm. Mhm.
because sometimes you don't have an answer,
Don't have an answer.
right? So this is the last question of the
Sure.
evening. Certainly, it's by Quincy James
Of
Reinhardt.
course,
And
love,
his
love
question
Quincy.
is, Dr. Crowder talks to us about the distinction between, please talk to us about the distinction between imposter positioning and imposter syndrome in the ways in which it affects the Black body politic.
Sure. So, imposter syndrome, and again, the idea was imposter syndrome being longer and having a more compound traumatic impact, if you will, than per se imposter phenomenon. But this
Mm-hmm.
idea of imposter posturing, I think that was what was happening with the folk in the academy who were pretending, living that they as if they were a part of a certain racial and ethnic group, and getting the benefits.
And getting the benefit.
So that
That's important.
that's the piece. So that Quincy, is that imposter posturing as well. That I'm like, well, who dares to be a Black person this day and age? Well, if the context says here are some fringe benefits for that, then you had some people who decided to do that. That's
Right.
a part of that imposter posturing, if you will. I think institutions can engage in imposter posturing if they hire first. If after 5-10 years there's still an only in
Mm-hmm.
any department, to me that's imposter posturing, that it was just DEI checking off the boxes. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that question, because I think it gets to the kind of two streams that were integral in my writing the book. Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Crowder. We appreciate you.
Oh,
This was such an enriching conversation tonight. I'm going to encourage everyone to make sure that you go and you purchase the book. And those of you that want to be a part of the drawing for the giveaway, make sure that you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers to win your copy. We so appreciate you watching Beyond the Gatekeepers tonight. We have one advertisement that we're going to show, two advertisements that we're going to show, and then we're going to do our drawing tonight.
From the blues to hip-hop, African Americans have driven sonic innovation for more than a century. While styles have changed, there's one sound that's remained constant, a source of strength and courage, comfort and wisdom. Gospel.
That's a little bit of gospel.
Gospel music is soul. Gospel music is R&B. Gospel music is funk. It's hip-hop. Gospel music is the full spectrum in terms of its sound of black music and beyond.
Mahalia Jackson, what was special about her voice?
She believed every word she was singing, and she wanted you to believe it.
Preachers have style, right? Gospel singers have style, right?
Black style in music and preaching is similar because it allows black people to believe that they can survive a bit longer. My mother had gone to New Bethel Baptist Church. C.O. Franklin would preach and then Aretha would sing. Oh my God, if you ain't got the spirit then, you dead.
The sermon becomes the song. The song becomes the sermon.
God, we ask that you would reinvigorate somebody.
It's almost as if there's a soundtrack in a church setting.
Amen, brother. That was beautiful.
For generations, gospel music and preaching have formed the bedrock of the black religious experience.
The sound still connects people. The sound still gathers people.
These astonishing art forms, carrying an enduring tradition, continue to evolve. Do you think there will always be gospel music 100 years from now?
I don't see how we can thrive without gospel music.
That's right.
I say it's going to always be there forever.
Listen, as we tell the story of how a people learn to sing the Lord's song in a strange land. This is the powerful story of gospel.
Thank you for watching. And so you'll know Bishop Flunder, Brother Miller, you see Pastor Ann Jefferson, Dr. Gabby and Andrew, Dr. Andrew, they're all in this, and Dr. Freddie Haynes. We want you to watch it. It's coming, I think, in February. If you can support our broadcast, we would love for you to do that. This is Beyond the Gatekeepers, current events through a theological and justice-informed lens. And if you want to support our broadcast, we ask that you send a donation. Send it via Cash App to $TFAM annual or to PayPal. Our PayPal is www.paypal.me/TFAM justice. This is so that we can continue to do this work, continue to increase our audience. We're looking for greater and bigger things on next year, and you'll see and hear more about that. Thank you so much for your support. God bless you. And now we have our giveaway. And so we are grateful to Dr. Stephanie for donating a book. We want you to make sure that you have put in beyond hashtag first, Beyond the Gatekeepers, all one word, for your opportunity to win. And so Pastor Sue is going to do her thing so that we can find out who the winner is for this evening. Tanya D. Jackson is the winner tonight. Congratulations, Tanya. Please go to Beyond the Gatekeepers page, put your address in, and Dr. Stephanie will make sure that you get the book. Thank you, everyone, for watching the show tonight. We say God bless you and have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Dr. Stephanie.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.